I'm going to kick it off to Melody Geraci from Active Transportation Alliance to get us going. Melody?
Morning, everybody. Happy almost September. Can anybody believe this? Time has flown by this summer for me personally, and I think for anybody who's working on any kind of funding application, the days kind of fly by. So thanks for taking time out today to join us for this second installment of webinars addressing the Illinois Transportation Enhancements Program. Per usual, the webinar is going to be recorded and posted at the Active Transportation Alliance's website, our page specifically dedicated to Itep and Safe Routes to School. The address is there. If you have questions throughout the webinar, do not hesitate. Go ahead and post those in the Q&A section of the elements at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be taking note of those and going through them at the end of the webinar. Closed captioning is available for this webinar. Once again, Active Transportation Alliance is a co-host of this webinar series. Myself, I'm the Deputy Executive Director at Active Trans, joined by my colleagues Maggie Sherwinski, the Director of Community Building and Leadership, and Crispina Ojeda-Simmons, who is a Planning Projects Manager with us. And our mission in the Chicago metro area mostly is to advocate for walking, biking, and public transportation to create healthy, sustainable, and equitable communities. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The Ispan program is the reason we're here today. So there's a grant that has been awarded to the state of Illinois through the Illinois Public Health Institute by the CDC to help with technical assistance and other sorts of professional expertise to create healthier communities. And in part, that means making them more walkable and bikeable. So through this partnership, we are being funded to put on this 3-part webinar series. This is number 2. And there's a companion program that we're calling the Bike Walk Learning Collaborative that is doing more intensive technical assistance and training and peer-to-peer networking for 20, I think we're up to like 25 communities now that are participating, most of those who are on the call today. So once again, we are at webinar number 2. The first webinar back in July, the recording once again is on our website. And we went through kind of the basics, project eligibility, some best practices, and kind of getting yourself prepared to create an application. I'm getting a note from Crispina that there's some background noise. So if you're not on mute, let's make sure we've got everybody on mute, Sarah, if we can. Today is part 2, and we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of the application itself. We're going to walk through it. We're going to talk about the scoring criteria. We're going to talk about the community mapping score, and then IDOT staff, including John Paris and Missy Dateman and Brian McCoy, and maybe a few others are on the line with us today to answer questions live. And then part 3 will be in a few more weeks in September. And that's almost exclusively going to be reserved for last minute questions as we approach that September deadline for your applications to be due. All right, our agenda today is we're going to just quickly refresh the overview and some of the resources that are available to you to help guide you through your application. Then we'll go in a fairly detailed manner through this scoring process, walking through the application, and then again Q&A with IDOT at the end. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Crispina.
Thank you, Melody. And Sarah, can we go to the next slide? Thank you. And so we're going to be providing just a quick overview of ITEP. The Illinois Transportation Enhancement Program is federally funded program administered and managed by the Illinois Department of Transportation, IDOT. And the source, it's a very important source for funding for walking, biking, and trail projects. And this funding occurs every 2 years. The calls for proposal for this particular cycle, it opened on August 1st and it's going through September the 30th. That may change from cycle to cycle, but approximately around the same time. So make sure to sign up and stay connected with IDOT for when that news comes out for future cycles. For this cycle, there are $125 million available in both state and federal funding. The next slide, please. So for this year, the guidelines from IDOT have been updated, and they are available on the Itep website. The funding is available from the bipartisan infrastructure law. So it's more funding than the previous cycle because of that funding. And another change is the project cap increased from 2 million in the previous cycle to 3 million in this cycle. A hard copy of your application is not required as it has been in other cycles. There have also been some improvements to the application process, the cost estimate table, and the community mapping tool, and we'll be getting into in more depth into those further on in this webinar, and so we'll have more on that. And there is a new focus on safety improvements in scoring, which we'll also be talking about. And so some helpful resources for just a refresher. The IDOT Itep grant page is going to have your access to the application portal, the updated Itep guidelines. There is also a sample application and cost table that you can access, and all the links and what is needed for you to complete to be pre-qualified for Gata is also listed there. And I believe Sarah's going to drop the link to that page on our chat momentarily. The Active Trans Itep resource page that Melody mentioned at the beginning, is where we are placing the Itep webinar series, recordings, and also where you will find answers to frequently asked questions. And in addition to that, oh, I'm sorry, Sarah, I wasn't. There are other relevant documents, and you'll see the address listed on the page here. I believe Sarah's also going to drop it in the chat. The next slide, Sarah. Thank you. There is also this list that you see on the slide with the district, local roads, streets, engineers. This information is actually from the IDOT Itep page. And there's also a map there if you're unsure as to what district you belong to, that you can click onto based on geography to locate that. But this is the same list that you'll find on the website. And if you want to reach the IDOT team, the email is listed on here, just .itep@illinois.gov. And so just a clarification that we wanted to provide around the transportation improvement plan requirements. These are specific for if you are in an MPO or an RPC. This doesn't apply if you are not in either one of those. So what is required is you let them know that you are applying for Itep funding and that you get a letter of support from them. The only exception to this is if you are in the Chicagoland region and your MPO is CMAP, then in that case, you would go to your Council of Mayors for a letter of support, or your COG, and Sarah's going to be dropping the link to that. There's a page on CMAP's website that you can go to that lists all of the different contacts. This Council of Mayors specifically have either a transportation or a planning liaison that would be listed, and that would be your first source of contact to reach out for this letter. And again, that's specific to Chicagoland region. Otherwise, you would reach out to your MPO or RPC. After award announcements are made, if your project is selected for funding, the additional requirement is that you reach back out to your MPO or RPC and let them know that you've been awarded Itep funds, and have them and make sure that it's included in the tip. this does not have to happen before you just when you are applying. This is only a requirement if you do receive funding this cycle. And again, if you're not in an MPO or RPC, you can disregard this tip requirement. And just a couple of, so the information on this slide is going to be really important to you once you get to completing your application. Your application is going to be asking you for the NOFO ID number, which is listed on here, the agency funding opportunity number, the CSFA, and the CFDA. And so if you can take a screenshot of this or later on when you are accessing the PowerPoint of this presentation, but make sure to make a note of all these numbers because they will be required of you as you're completing your application. And here's just in brief a glossary of terms and what they mean. As we will be referring to these in the rest of the presentation, just for you to be aware of those. And just something that I forgot to mention in the previous slide, in terms of project qualifications or any questions that you have that are specific to your project, please make sure to reach out to your district, to your IDOT district engineer that were listed on that slide a couple slides ago, because they will be your primary resource in terms of helping you to complete your application in terms of like defining the project that you're applying for funding. And I think with that, I'm turning it over to Maggie.
Thanks, Crispina. So now we're going to dig into a bit about scoring and how it works for Itep. So you can go to the next slide, Sarah. There are two scores you need to be aware of, and we reviewed this briefly in the last webinar, but there's an application score and a community needs score, and both are out of a total of 100 points. That application score, that focuses solely on the merits of your project that are based on a set of criteria that we'll be reviewing shortly. And for the application score, all projects need to score at least 52 points to be considered for funding. Then the community needs score is looked at next, and it's based on several factors. It's based on several factors, including poverty level and median household income. But once all applications are given that application score, then the community needs score is used to determine your local match requirement for winning projects, so that the highest need communities will either pay no local match or a reduced local match. And this only applies to walking, biking, and trail projects. There are other types of projects you can apply for Itep, but those would not be eligible for the sliding scale local match. So next slide. So applications are scored on several criteria. So we're going to go over each of these this list, and it's really important to think about how do you make sure you incorporate all of these ideas into your narrative in your application and make sure you're addressing all of them in some way. So the criteria this year is very similar to what was used in the 2020 cycle if you applied for Itep then. And again, the total score is out of 100 points. We don't know the exact amount for each of these criteria, how much they're each worth, but from our understanding, the scores are fairly evenly distributed between these criteria. So first here on the list is eligibility. So that's just looking at, does your project meet the eligibility requirements for Itep? That we went over this more in depth in the first Itep webinar. So for example, your project can't be solely for recreation. It can't be a maintenance project. And you have to make sure your Gata requirements are completed. But if you want more details on what's eligible, I would say look at our recording from last month, the first webinar. Review the FAQ on our website and check out the Itep excuse me, IDOT guidelines. So every project is very different. So you can also check in with your local IDOT district that Crispina gave you the contacts for if you want more clarity on whether your project is eligible. And then next here is strength of transportation relationship. So this is definitely something you want to make sure you highlight in your application narrative. So IDOT wants to know that this project is truly for transportation. So, and that means it should be connecting people to destinations. And again, that should be clearly explained. So destinations might include job, like helping people reach their workplace, businesses, schools, universities, shopping centers, excuse me. And the more destinations your project reaches, the higher your application will score. So a project, so just for an example, because this question was coming up. So a project that connects a residential area to a forest preserve or park wouldn't score as well as a project that connects a residential area to a forest preserve and to a school and to a grocery store. So the more destinations your project can reach, the better. So if your project only connects to a park, say, really think about, are there programs or facilities that you're connecting to people to in the parks, such as a farmer's market or food stand or a festival. So make sure to detail and really explain how you're helping people reach places and destinations. Next on this list, the project should meet category intent. So this is about knowing that there are 9 ITEP categories that are outlined in the guidelines. So if you're applying for a walking, biking, or trail project, that would be category 1 or 3. And just a reminder that these are the only 2 funding categories that can receive the ITEP state funding, which is $100 million or a majority of the available ITEP funding. And they're also the only categories that qualify for a reduced local match. So we highly recommend applying for a walking, biking, and trail project. And you can only choose 1 category in your application. And in some cases, you might feel like your application falls into multiple categories. So you should be choosing the category that's most relevant to your project. And it's your judgment call on that. Public benefits and accessibility, the 4th bullet on this list. So that's just looking at how will your project improve accessibility? Has ADA compliance been addressed? Is the project on public property? So how do people get there? Cost effectiveness. Does your project have a high public benefit compared to the cost? So how many people will be impacted by your project? And is there a regional impact? So just trying to explain how it's going to benefit people and really think big picture. Project support, local commitment. So here you should be able to show that there is strong support from the community from your project. So that would be documenting any public meeting participation, survey information, or letters of support. Within a regional or local, regional, or state plan. So is your project in a plan? So make sure if it is, include that information in your proposal, because this helps show that you are committed to the project. And that's especially true for larger scale projects that might need to be completed in multiple segments. If your project is not specifically mentioned in a plan, are there any plans that state that there is a community or regional goal to improve walking or biking? And if you do have that, include that in your application. And then, so you can go to the next slide. So connectivity to existing facilities. So how does your project help improve the overall active transportation network in your community or in your region? So if you can think regionally and how your project creates a larger network, so maybe it's connecting to a sidewalk network or a transit system or a path that's connected to a regional system, make sure to address that, bring that up in your application narrative. Second bullet here, prior sponsor investment. So this is looking at the financial commitment of the sponsor. So for previous ITEP applications, if you had applied in the past, was the sponsor able to provide matching funds? Was the sponsor able to financially cover some of the earlier work required, such as some preliminary engineering and some planning work? IDOT prefers projects that they feel are more likely to be completed. But of course, you know, in 2020 and this year, not all projects will require a local match. So that will be taken into account. But a sponsor does have to show that they're willing to cover future maintenance costs of a project. So that will help, addressing that will help your score here. Project sponsor capacity and past performance. So the sponsor has, this is showing that the sponsor has resources to complete the project, both financially and non-financially. So the sponsor has put effort into completing a detailed cost estimate. They have shown a history of completing previous ITEP projects in a timely manner, and as well as maintenance costs being considered. Project readiness. So this is looking at right-of-way, acquisition, coordination with railroads, and completion of phase 1 engineering. For right-of-way acquisition, for example, so if land has been acquired, you should make sure you're noting that. If it has not been acquired yet and it's needed for your project, ideally you can show that discussions have been started so that there's some movement towards progressing there, because acquiring land can take time. So again, IDOT wants to see projects that are kind of moving along and will get completed. Same with railroad coordination, that can take a long time. So if ideally that's you've been reaching out to the railroad, that process has started. So make sure to mention that in your application. And then phase 1 engineering, additional points are given if you have phase 1 engineering already completed. If you don't have phase 1 engineering completed, you can get partial points if you show that it's getting started or it's in progress. And then application completeness. So this is just making sure you filled out all of the narrative questions, provided all of the required attachments. And then this last one is the one new criteria this year. So it's showing that your project is improving safety for people walking or biking. And so in your narrative, you should be documenting, explaining how will your project improve safety. So you should explain what is the issue, what's the current problem, and how will your project address that problem. So for example, a side path or a trail facility might eliminate car, bicycle, pedestrian conflicts. A pedestrian bicycle bridge would eliminate crossing at a busy intersection or eliminate a railroad crossing. So just make sure to highlight that in your application to get those points. So next slide. So that was an overview of the score, but just a few other tips of things to keep in mind that really make clear that your project serves a transportation purpose and how it connects people to destinations. Reminder that your project can't be solely for recreation, and it also cannot be for routine maintenance. The projects are capped at $3 million per project, so that's the maximum award amount. A good cost estimate is key, and you'll want a professional engineer to complete this, and we'll go over that shortly as well. This is a reimbursable grant program, so we went over that a bit in the last webinar, but the project sponsor is responsible for paying upfront costs for preliminary engineering, for land acquisition, and utility relocations. And then IDOT will reimburse you for construction. there is an option to have IDOT cover those construction costs if they do the construction letting. Consult IDOT's manuals, so the Bureau of Design and Environment manual and the Bureau of Local Roads and Streets manual. So those are IDOT's design standards that you should make sure you're referencing as you're envisioning your project, and make sure your project's in alignment with what's allowed. If you wanted to propose a facility that is included in another well-respected design guide like NACDO, for example, IDOT recommends getting in touch with your IDOT district's local road staff prior to submitting your application, so you can make sure you're submitting a project that's eligible for funding. And then which phases to include. In general, IDOT, likes to see projects that are more likely to move towards completion. So if you do need to include phase 1 engineering in your application, IDOT recommends, if possible, bundling that together with, having phase 1 and phase 2 bundled together, and potentially construction costs as well, as long as your project doesn't exceed $3 million, but you could consider applying for the project in segments in that case. So just something to keep in mind. And IDOT has indicated that phase 1 only applications are best for very large projects. So if you have any questions about any of this, and you're trying to figure out, is your project eligible? Because again, every project's very different and distinct. Get in touch directly with IDOT and they'll help you work through those details. Next slide, Sarah. Now on to the community needs score. So high need communities and local match levels will be determined using IDOT's community mapping tool. So once all applications are scored, submitted and scored, 25% of total Itep funds will be awarded to the top qualifying proposals with projects that have the highest community score. And next slide. And the community needs score, if you go to those Itep guidelines, it's to figure out how to map your project on that mapping tool. It's detailed in those Itep guidelines. So check that out if you're new to this, if this is your first time using the mapping tool. In 2020, that was the first time this tool was introduced. Also, our second webinar from 2020 goes into a lot more detail about the community map. And Sarah just posted a link to that video. And if you go to the 33-minute mark, you can check out details. We walk you through how to use that mapping tool. So next slide. And just a brief overview. So that community needs score is based on 4 factors that are listed here on the slide. So community size, your property tax base, percent below poverty level, and median household income. And the last 2, the poverty level and the median income, those are the most important factors in your final score calculation. And the score is based on census tract data and includes all census tracts within a half-mile buffer of your project limits. So depending on your score and depending on what all of the other applications score for their community needs score, your match could be 0% where you don't have to pay anything. It could be 10% or it could be 20%. And it really all depends on the scores of who else is applying this year. Next slide. And this is just an example of once you draw your project on the map, the output you'll get. So you can kind of see this particular project covers lots of census tracts, and then it comes out with a community score that will be used in your application. And this actually mapping your project out will also auto populate a lot of other pieces within your application. So this is actually the first thing you have to do is put this draw your project out in the tool. So next slide. All right, so now we're going to go into the application walkthrough before we get to IDOT Q&A. So next slide, Sarah. So again, well, first you're going to log into the application portal on the IDOT website. And then the first thing again is what you're going to do is you're going to map your project. And this will auto-populate various parts of your application, and make sure to double check that. Make sure everything was auto-populated correctly. And then Melody and I are going to go through each part of the application in more detail. So next slide. So there are really 8 different sections. So first, you'll be filling out general information about your project. And then second, you'll be filling out details about the sponsor. So that would be contact information such as address, phone, email. So these first few are very straightforward. The third section is your project category. So as we mentioned before, check off one project category for your project, and you're ultimately the decider of which category makes the most sense for your project. Next slide. And then the fourth section is where you're going to be documenting your project costs. So just an overview. So if there are significant errors in your cost estimate, IDOT may decide that your application is not eligible to be evaluated. So this is a really important section to get right and to have the right people involved. Putting together this cost estimate will affect your application score. So IDOT recommends using an engineering firm, and they can ensure that the work is feasible and meets IDOT and federal criteria. So you'll be submitting through your application a summary cost table, and that's actually part of the application process. And then you'll also be submitting a separate attachment of a detailed cost estimate. So we'll go over both of these. Next slide, Sarah. So the summary cost table, it should include both eligible and ineligible project expenses. So you should separate those out, but note that the project sponsor is responsible for 100% of any ineligible costs that you list out. The chart is set up to automatically calculate the Itep fund requested and the required match column. So you don't need to make any adjustments there. And then, depending on what happens with the community needs score and your local match, that will be adjusted later. And below the table, there are a few questions that you'll need to answer. So one is, will you move forward if you don't receive that lower local match assistance? And are you applying for any other funding for this particular project? And again, the Itep guidelines are really helpful for digging into the details of how to fill out this this table. And I just wanted to see if IDOT had any additional advice or thoughts they could share about the summary cost table and providing cost estimates. So John or Brian or Missy, do you have anything you wanted to add?
Hi, Maggie. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, this is John. I just want to let everybody know that we have totally reconfigured this page in the application for this funding cycle. It is almost backwards. If you've done this before, it's almost backwards from what you probably saw before. And we've tried to simplify it both for you and for us. The first column is the total cost of each of the phases of the project. And that is exactly what it says it is. What is the total cost of that phase? That goes there. The next column is local only. And I just want to let everybody know, local only would include any funds that you plan to put in yourself. You know, if you've got an extra 30,000 in your capital budget that you don't know what to do with and you want to throw it at this project, that's where that would go. This would also include any grants that you've received from other agencies or organizations that would go towards this project. And also, if, for instance, you have any donated items, that would usually come about with right of way. For instance, if you have, for instance, $100,000 worth of right of way, and somebody's going to donate $60,000 worth of that right of way, that would go under local only. Once those two columns are filled out, the table will calculate how much required match you're going to need, and that then will also calculate the ITEP funds requested. One thing that you'll notice different this year is once that calculation is complete, if the total ITEP funds requested is more than $3 million, you're going to get an error and you cannot save this page. So if that happens, you need to go back to your total cost or local only columns and make some adjustments. We put that in place mostly because we always get applications where even if the cap is $3 million, I can guarantee somebody's going to say, we're requesting 6.2 million. And what that does, when it runs our reports in the system and does calculations as we're trying to figure out where our funding cutoffs are and stuff, it causes a real pain for us. And it causes a pain for you too, because we're going to come back and say, what are you doing? So if that reaches more than 3 million, you need to go back and make some adjustments. The two questions below, we have reworded since the last cycle, and hopefully these are a little more self-explanatory. There was some confusion before. Basically, if you only receive state assistance towards 50% of the local match, are you willing to go ahead with the project? If you receive no state assistance for the local match, are you willing to go forward with the project? And the last little cell on that page is if you are receiving funding from another program, organization, state agency, just let us know what that is. And that just helps us get a better idea of how the funding is going to work for your project. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, thanks, John.
Okay.
And Sarah, could you go to the next slide? And John, you might have more to say about this also. So this is, so in addition to that summary table, which is part of the application process, there's also this additional requirement of a detailed cost estimate, which you'll attach to your application. And here's a list of, what you would be including in that cost estimate. So your material description, units, quantity, unit price, total cost, and the costs here should be displayed separately for each plan phase or location of your project. And you don't want to include a lump sum, so there shouldn't just be one line. There is a good example of a detailed cost estimate in ITEP guidelines at the very end in Appendix 1, so you can kind of see the detail that might be needed. And also that contingencies are not, should not be a separate line item. Contingencies or inflation, it should be built into your project costs. But John, I don't know if you want to say anything more about the detailed cost estimate.
I don't think so. Check the example that's in the ITEP guidelines. If you have any questions, let us know. We will probably direct you to the local IDOT office. But yeah, if you have questions, we can help you answer them.
Great, thanks, John. Sarah, next slide. And we also just wanted to bring up again, so projects are often rejected if the cost estimate isn't done accurately. So keep that in mind, put some time into this. And in the ITEP guidelines, there is kind of a range of, as a guide of what you might expect, different phases of your project to cost. So phase 1 engineering could be 8 to 12% of project costs, for example. And then Active Trans, we've reached out to several engineering firms around the state that have capacity to offer some application support for higher need communities. So you can check out that list of engineering firms on the activetrans.org/ITEP website. Many of the firms can help potentially with your cost estimate, with developing a project scope, with just general brainstorming or giving you advice. But just note that you cannot count these services as an in-kind donation towards the grant's local match, and also provide for engineering firms, providing free application support doesn't guarantee a firm will be selected for paid work, and it doesn't mean that a project sponsor can skip the quality-based selection process. So next slide. So I'm going to turn it over to Melody now to talk more about the part of the application that is your narrative, where you're going to be kind of addressing all of those scoring criteria aspects within your application.
Thanks, Maggie. Excuse me. So this is just really a reiteration of the project of the requirements for the funding program put into narrative form. So you're going to be, you know, the art of the word is going to be important here. And remember, character limits are in play. So be as, you know, brief and succinct as you can as well, while still fully describing what's being asked. So in the project description section, there are a few subsections. The first is a kind of an executive summary of the project, quick overall summary. And then you're going to get into more detail. The project relationship to service transportation is the next one under letter B. And this is where you're going to make sure and highlight how this project is not just for recreation, that it does serve a transportation purpose. Think of it in terms of saying, why is this facility required in order to get people from one place to another? What problem is it solving? Is there currently an inability for people to travel safely by foot or by bike from A to B? And how will this project solve that problem? How is the project related to the overall transportation network, where you're going to describe that this is not a standalone project out in the middle? You know, it's not a bike lane to nowhere, so to speak, or a trail or a side path that does not connect to the rest of the transportation network. So we want to be able to make sure that people can, as they're traveling by foot or by bike, use this facility throughout to connect themselves to other parts of the network. What's the proximity to the other transportation facilities? There's actually a question in the Q&A about this a little bit. So how closely does this project, how close is it to transit stops or stations, other trail access points or gateways, the rest of the bike network? What's the distance, the physical distance to those things, and the relationship to key destinations? The question in the Q&A, and for IDOT folks, you can think about it, we won't answer it right now, but is how far is too far between key destinations? So is there kind of a general limit that people should keep in mind that, oh, maybe 10 miles of trail is stretching the definition a little bit too far between being a linkage between key destinations, or is that not a factor? Next slide, Sarah. Section C is the location, literally, very literally, where is it? The project, and then further into that description of the location is what are the termini, what's the start point, end point, you know, the 2 points that define the project. If it is, and this needs to actually line completely up with how you've drawn the project on your community map. If you're integrating things like, you know, a system of crosswalks that also can figure in, for example, you know, just try your best to explain how that the whole thing is a connection of facilities. The project length and distance, that's pretty self-explanatory. And then the proposed scope of work, where you're going to get into detail about each element of the project, each phase of the project, breaking down, you know, how the funds are going to be used to pay for the different pieces of construction, the different pieces of the engineering design, and so on and so forth. Make sure that you're detailing each element of the project. Again, character limits are in play, so do your best with what you have to work with. But you know, if you are, for example, seeking to construct a side path, you'll want to talk about if right-of-way acquisition is included in that, if you need to do design engineering, if you need to do leveling, if you need to do infill, so on and so forth. And then what order those stages will come in. And then finally, if this is one piece of a larger project that is maybe spanning several years, or this is the third segment of something that's got 5 total segments, and 6 segments, 1 and 5 have been built, and this is number 3, kind of go into some detail about that. Next slide. Benefits. This is where you kind of make that case. You're going to sell the project's benefits to the people that live in your community, your residents. How is it going to increase people's ability to be physically active on a routine basis, on a daily basis? Will it, you know, reduce congestion? Is it going to lower emissions? Will it provide better equitable access to different amenities in your area for people who don't drive or can't drive, people with disabilities, children, older adults, people with low income? And then we have a link here from the League of American Bicyclists benchmarking report. They have a really nice chapter on how to make your case. So feel free to go there and pull things out at will. Section H is going to ask you to, this is that new element that Maggie just talked about. This is new today, this year, to describe any safety benefits. So this is where you're going to look for some crash data. If you have any, not only pedestrian or bicycle specific crashes that have happened in your project's vicinity recently, but also car on car crashes. You know, if it's a hostile environment and it's so hostile that it terrifies people who are walking and biking from even trying to navigate that area, then that's also something that you could bring up as as fodder for the importance of your project. Next slide. Section 6 is the project status. So this is where IDOT is going to want to know, and the reviewers are going to want to know, how far along is this project? Is this related to, again, other larger projects? So if you've got an entire bike network that you're looking to build over the next 5 years, and you're 25% of the way through completion of that network, how does this project relate to that larger vision? If it's a standalone, if it's a one-off, go ahead and state that too. If not part of a phased larger initiative. If you've previously gotten any ITEP funding for this work, please detail that. IDOT does want to know if there's already some state money and federal money skin in the game, so to speak. And, if this funding this particular piece would be, would be connected to continuing to achieve that overall goal. And then how many people do you think will use this? What kinds of people do you think will be using this project? That could be based on some of your community outreach and your input that you have evidence for, or just your best projection as to who are the people that live in close proximity to this? What types of special populations are within a proximity to this project that might be using it? Land acquisition and easement. The IDOT wants to know who owns, if there is extra land that needs to be acquired, who currently owns it. If you need to purchase it, what are you going to be purchasing, if at all? If again, it's already owned by the jurisdiction that's going to be building the project, make sure you state that too, but an acquisition won't be required in that situation, obviously. Next. Oop, I think we're going back one. Yeah. Also in section 6 is the question of readiness. And this is where you're going to explain whether you've got physical engineering, Pe1 or Pe2, completed, underway, not yet started. If the right-of-ways have not been secured, how are you going to do that? And what are the steps that are going to be needed in order to get that authorization? Railroads, oh boy, God help us. I'm just kidding, sort of, if railroads are involved. But make sure that you've had some kind of contact with your local, the railroads that are crossing or adjacent to, or however else involved in this project. Again, if there are safety benefits to be had, what are those specifically? What pieces of the project will enhance safety? And then your anticipated date of construction. When do you think, if everything goes swimmingly, when will you be able to break ground and get started on constructing these elements? And then public involvement, we've talked about this in the previous webinar. Have you had public meetings? Did you, during the planning phase, if your project is noted in a plan, what was the public engagement process in developing that plan that helped contribute to identifying this project as something that the public needs and wants? Getting your letters of support, and again, be creative with that. Think about, again, the populations that are being served: school districts, park districts, senior living facilities, assisted housing or affordable housing units, landlords, local business community, just about anybody that you think might want to see this project done. And of course, your government resolutions, not only the sponsoring agency or entity, committing to helping fund and sponsor this project, but also any intergovernmental, intra or intergovernmental agreements that are needed. Next. And then the maintenance plan, there is a question about this in the chat as well. So when we get to the Q&A section, just a note for IDOT to kind of start thinking about answering that question. IDOT wants to make sure that you've got a plan for maintaining what's been built. We love to build things in our country and then kind of forget about them, right? So do you have a maintenance plan? This could be something as simple as, yeah, we have a maintenance plan for all of our public infrastructure in our town or our county, and here's what it is, and we'll provide you a link to that, or we'll upload it as a an attachment or whatnot. But if you don't, what is your plan? So every 3 years, we're going to go through and repaint, or every, every 2 years, we're going to assess all side paths for potholes and, roots, tree roots and whatnot. Do you have equipment to do maintenance? Who's going to be responsible for doing the maintenance? It's Public Works, it's the County Highways Division, whatnot. And then how do you pay for those maintenance improvements and maintenance? How do you pay for that maintenance? Just, some basic details like that. Next. And then this is section 8 is all your retired attachments, Gata, which we talked about a little bit in the first webinar, and we included links to, and it's on the Active Trans webpage, as well as on the Itep guidance. There are specific Gata people to reach out to with Gata questions, because it's, as many of us know, it's a different animal, and there have been a few changes in recent months and over the last year or so in Gata certifications. So the government resolutions, the detailed cost estimate, which is a separate attachment, the detailed project map, which is in addition to your community map score that you're doing, that's part of the system, the application system. They also want an actual detailed project map that's a separate attachment. An IDOT allowance letter. This is if you have a project that is adjacent to or abutting a state road, or is literally on a state road, you will need to have that allowance letter from your IDOT local district. And then any photographs that you might have of the project area. Quick note that the Itep system has a max allowance of 35 megabytes for attachments. That can be tough, so look to condense your PDFs and other large files. Do what you can to get those file sizes down. Next. Finally, and then additional attachments. These are not the required ones necessarily, but definitely are going to help your score. Any proof of public involvement you've done above and beyond what was in a plan or in previous documents, letters of support, your previous plans that might include, again, if this project has been detailed or identified in plans that have been done before, you'll want to attach those. Renderings, if you have any, and then any supplemental materials that we haven't talked about here. And once again, the same attachment file, the size limit applies here as well. Next. You're going to submit through the application, the online application process. When you get to the end, everything's all tied up in a neat little bow and looking terrific. You're ready to finalize and submit. Click those buttons. You should receive an automated email that will notify you that your application has been received. No hard copy is required. Hallelujah. And the submission deadline is 5 p.m. Central Time on the 30th of September. Next. Quick word about the sunset clause. So there have been some questions about this previously. There are specific deadlines provided for each phase of the approved work if you are indeed awarded. Construction funds must be obligated within 4 years. So you need to obligate those funds. It doesn't mean that construction has to be completed within 4 years, but you need to have dedicated, authorized, and approved those funds to be spent on construction within 4 years. And IDOT can be a little bit more specific about that when we get to Q&A if I'm not saying that properly. If you are being funded only for PE1 or 2, that also must be completed within 4 years, right? So that's a little different than being obligated. That has to be completely finished up within 4 years, and then construction must be completed within 10 years of the award. If you can't meet a deadline, your funds could be taken back. I think everybody on this, all the staff and personnel on this call would recommend just being in really close communication with IDOT if you're starting to feel like, uh-oh, you know, time is slipping away and we're having some barriers are coming up and we may not finish this on time. Just be in very close communication with IDOT so that they understand what's going on. And deadline extensions are a possibility. So if your IDOT contact knows what's going on, it'll improve your chances of getting that deadline extension. Next. And we have arrived at Q&A. So I have been doing a little bit of monitoring of the Q&A section, but I'm going to go ahead and start back at the top. If you do have questions that are lingering and you have not typed them into the Q&A box, please go ahead and get going with that now. Let me take a breath and see if there's anything that IDOT or my fellow panelists want to say before we dive in to the Q&A.
Melody,
Yes.
this is John.
Hi, John.
We had a question come up in the last webinar about ADA requirements at an intersection. I'm not sure if I misspoke or misunderstood,
Next
but
slide,
a
Sarah.
couple questions came back, and I believe, there you go. I believe Steve Letsky is on the line in this webinar. Steve, are you out there? Come on, Steve. I know you're there. Okay. But he kind of called me out on this because I think I must have misspoke. Does ADA need to be addressed on all corners of an intersection, even when there are, you get that out of the way, no existing or planned pedestrian facilities on the opposing side of the road? Okay, Steve is on, but he seems to be muted. Can somebody unmute him?
I'm sorry. I'm not sure we have that capability since he's not a panelist.
Oh, okay. All right. The basic answer is no. You only need to supply ADA compliant intersection if there's actually a sidewalk there existing, or if there's one being proposed. If it leads into one corner of an intersection leads into an empty lot and there is no transportation network of any type there as far as sidewalks, then no, you don't have to do that one. Is that correct? Is that correct, Steve? It must be. There we go. There we go. Yeah. If there's nothing existing or nothing being proposed, of course you don't need to do ADA there.
Terrific.
Okay.
Okay. I think we can probably exit out of the potentially, should we go ahead and exit out of the, well, I guess it doesn't really matter because there are only a few of us with faces on this webinar, but yeah, there we go. To do Q&A. So let me start at the top. Jessica, let me start with you. Mayor, Jessica mentions that they had a meeting in their jurisdiction.
Hey, Melody.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Steve replied in the Q&A.
Oh, great.
And he said where you make alterations to the PAR, make the ADA improvements as required to the altered points.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks. Jessica's question was, who can they connect with at IDOT regarding surveying an intersection that the community would like to have signalized across Route 45? is the answer to that your local roads, or if you're up in the Chicago metro region, your council of governments, see who that connection at IDOT might be?
That would be the answer. You want to go to your local IDOT district office.
Perfect. Another question is, and I'm not, we might need some clarification on this. Anonymous attendee asks, will applications for complete streets programs be applicable for this grant? And I'm not sure I understand that. So if you were the person that asked that question, could you please clarify in the Q&A, and I'll come back to that. Another question says that their Gata is complete. However, there was no PRA. Anybody know what that acronym means? Is that something that needs to be done in addition to the pre-qualification and the ICQ? Brian, I see you're unmuted. Go for it. Oh, we can't hear you, Brian. Nope. Brian had some audio struggles earlier. Let's put a pin in that one. We'll come back to it while Brian works on his audio. Another question. Oh, go for it. We got you, Brian. Oh, now you went away again. You're mute.
All right.
There you go.
So the programmatic risk assessment is a Gata document that's on the website, and it just asks questions about your agency. So that is going to need to be completed. It's a required Gata document. So it is separate from the ICQ. I know the Gata requirements are starting to combine with the ICQ with similar language. However, for this application, that PRA programmatic risk assessment will be required and uploaded as an attachment.
Great, thank you. Next question, what kind of street lighting would be covered under ITEP? I don't know, I'm not quite sure I understand that question, but it's pedestrian scale for sure. Pedestrian or bicycle scale street lighting, not highway style lighting. Is there anything else you can think of, IDOT, that might address that?
Lighting can get confusing.
Okay.
Trying to figure out what's pedestrian lighting, what is street lighting, what could be possibly covered 80-20 match, or what is 50-50 match. I would suggest sending us an email at dot.itep, and we will get back to the specifics of your project.
Perfect. And Maggie is, for those of you who are watching, Maggie is attempting to type answers in so that you can have a little bit of a record as we go along. Next question. How do you demonstrate you're going to be responsible for maintenance? I don't know if we answered this or not. Does this need to be a resolution, a letter, or just addressed in the application? Thoughts?
Just addressed in the application.
Great.
We trust that you're telling us the truth.
The honor system.
Yeah.
Next question. Michael asks, we are not certain whether right-of-way is going to be needed. So how should that be handled?
Tell us in the application. Basically, just be upfront and honest. Right-of-way could be required. We're not certain yet until we move further into the PE process. That's all we need to know.
Great. There's an anonymous attendee asking, where will the score be tabulated once some or many of these factors are identified? I'm not sure I understand that. There is not really a scoring rubric per se that, you know, once on the other end, once the cycle is over and applications have been scored, that information is made available after the fact. But I'm not sure I understand the question. Brian, John, any?
I could explain the scoring a little more, I guess.
Great. Perfect.
Obviously, the community map score is calculated within the system, and you will know that right away after you do your mapping. As far as the application score, what happens is once all the applications are in and 5 o'clock on September 30th passes, we will look at every single application in our office here. We will basically at that point make sure the application has all the attachments, everything that's required is included, and we'll also look at whether or not the project as a whole is eligible. For instance, if as Maggie was talking before, if you've got a trail and it's just running into the middle of a park, we're going to look and determine, is that recreational or is that really part of the transportation network? If it's ineligible, it will stop right there. And there are always, a handful. Once we determine that it's eligible, it is sent out to our reviewers. Every project will have at least 12 people. Those are all members of different areas of IDOT. Also, the MPOs will be reviewing and scoring the applications. They do this completely independently of one another. We give them a deadline to do that. Once that is done, we bring all those scores together and we'll basically determine an average score for your project based on all of those scores that came from the reviewers. And at that point, then we start deciding. We figure out who ranks highest, and we figure out we basically run that table down until we run out of money. That's kind of how it works. It's pretty simple and straightforward. It's a lot of work, but we try to make it as simple as possible. So hopefully that answers the question.
Great, thank you. And just for those of you who are on the call, the Q&A box, once we've answered a question and we've typed in the answer, it's going to go into the middle column under answered questions. And then we will be posting those answers to our website, those Q's and A's. So you can look at, they will be documented for later consumption. If a city, Brandy asks, if a city is going to sponsor an MPO or RPC, can the city finance its portion through a local bank? That's a unique one. So once again, if a city is going to be the sponsor for an MPO or a regional planning commission, so I guess they're the applicant and the city is the sponsor.
Okay.
Does that sound right? Can the city finance its portion through a local bank?
I don't think we have a problem with that. The city's going to be financially responsible for the funds.
Right.
Where they get them from, I don't think financing is an issue. I think Greg Lupton is out there from our local roads office. Greg, is that an issue?
You can type your answer into the Q&A, Greg. So while Greg's doing that, let's move along. We'll circle back, Randy. Andrew asks, in regard to the community plans showing this improvement, if a local ped bike plan stated a need for bike lanes along a boulevard, but the application proposes a road diet plus a multi-use path instead along the same boulevard, is this okay? So I guess if the facility that's noted in a plan is a little different, qualitatively from what's being proposed in your proposal, the idea for a different facility comes after the plan is written. Is that okay?
As long as they can show that, that it satisfies the intent of the plan, and if the drafters of the plan are cool with that, then yeah.
Yeah, I completely understand where you're coming from there, Andrew. Plans could be written 5 to 7 years ago and things evolved, right? So as long as the spirit of what's implied in the plan is being met by the project that's being proposed, I imagine, does that sound about right, John? That it doesn't have to be like a specifically one exactly identical one for one, this
Right.
project. Yeah, okay. Vanessa asks, a sponsor was awarded the max 2 million on a previous ITEP funding cycle for an eligible project. Can that same sponsor apply again for the same project to request additional funds up to the new 3 million cap?
No,
No.
that is against the law.
Wow.
Yeah, no, can't do that.
Great. Okay, clear. Someone please clarify the state as sponsor concept under eligible applicants?
To a point. This was a new eligibility under the last highway bill, federal highway bill. And basically the way we're looking at it is if you're awarded a project, once you go to bid, you have two options. You can go have a local letting, or you can have a state letting, which basically state letting basically means that we put your project on our regular letting list and it's bid through the state. In that case, then the state is the entity that is upfronting the funds to make that happen. And in that case, I guess we would be considered the sponsor. There was not a real definite definition of what they meant as state as sponsor in the new bill. That's kind of the way we're looking at it, although we haven't had any official clarification of what that actually was intended to mean. But I think if you go to a state letting, that pretty much says it.
Thank you. A couple of palate cleansers here. Valerie wants to know, hey, IDOT folks, do you get really excited around ITEP time? Is it like tax time for accountants?
Sure.
Oh, good.
It is actually fun. It honestly is fun because we get to talk to so many local agencies and see what plans they're proposing and what they're doing for their communities. So yeah, it's hectic but fun.
I love that. Our friend Tiffany from Southern 5 wants to know, does the online application allow for you to get started, stop, come back where you picked up, and pick up later where you left off, or do you have to do it all at once?
No, you can stop and start again.
Excellent. Is there a width of sidewalk considered to be like recommended or best practice for hiking or biking use?
I believe it's 5 foot. Steve Letsky is still out there. I bet he can confirm that for me.
Great. I think that's what I understand is the best practices.
Yeah,
minimum 5 foot. Minimum 5 foot.
I don't think that's changed.
Yeah. If it's a multi-use, like a two-way path, that might be different, but I think it's just right.
Yep.
Will an application be significantly impacted if the applicant is not prepared to complete the project if they receive no state match? So if you answer no, we cannot commit to completing this project if we don't receive state match. Does that impact your chances of being funded?
Possibly. If we get to the point where we do the rankings and everything and we look, you have a good ranking, your project should be awarded, but then we look at the community scores, we realize you're not getting, then we will probably not award. We may contact you first and say, are you sure this was your answer? And this is what you meant? But yeah, if you can't afford to do it without the match assistance, then yeah, we would probably suggest you try again.
Okay. We are at 9 minutes and counting, so I'm just presencing that in case we stick around for a few extra minutes. If everybody's available to do that, try and do so. I'm not sure we'll get through everything. Our friend Sherry at Christopher Burke Engineering wants to know if you could give specific direction regarding how to obtain the IDOT letter of allowance.
Contact your local IDOT district office, and they will want to know what you're proposing. And basically, this letter of allowance is basically letting us know that you've contacted the district, you've consulted with them, you've told them, you know, we're going to apply for this project. Do you think overall that you would agree with us being able to build this project near or on a state route, you know, given the conceptual information that we have?
Great.
And
I know, knowing Chris Burke is up here in the Chicago metro region, serves a lot of suburban municipalities. There may be District 1 is so big. There may be, you know, a few different layers you have to go through, or maybe CMAP or the councils of government might have more specific information about who to go to at local roads.
Yep.
Let's see. Got that one. Sorry, I'm bopping around a little bit, Maggie. I hope I'm not confusing you too much. To whom should letters of support be addressed?
To IDOT or to the, it can be addressed to the sponsor.
Great. Is there a specific definition for a shared use path for recreation versus transportation? In other words, is there specific mileage to a destination required? This is the question that I referenced a little earlier. Like, is there a certain distance between destinations that would kind of test your assumptions about whether it's really serving a transportation purpose?
I'll throw out an example. We have one path that I know is going to be applied for this cycle that we've talked to them, and it's a 14-mile path between two small communities. And there are a lot of people who travel back and forth between those communities for work and such. And they called that, basically asked the same question. And the answer was, go for it. If you can prove that it's a viable transportation route that is being used for something other than recreation, more than recreation, then yeah, absolutely go for it.
Great. Could you explain Dustin wants to know if someone could explain the break between Pe1 and Pe2. He says our agency generally considers Pe1 to be up to 30 or 40% design and up to NEPA activities as needed. Does that sound reasonable to you all, IDOT?
I think so, but again, talk to your local district office.
Okay. Anita wants to know if they should put the planned local match in the local only column.
No.
No.
The match will be calculated under the I think it's called match required column. That'll be calculated for you.
Great. Anita also would like to know, would wayfinding signage or bike path signage through a community be eligible for Itep?
Yes.
And yes. Great. Oh, someone wants to know, is providing links to planning documents instead of directly uploading the exhibits suffice?
No.
No.
We do not. We don't want to see links.
Okay. Okay. Quick follow-up question from Jack on the resolution question previously. Is the sample resolution that's provided one that should be passed prior to the application submission? Or is the sample resolution that's provided one for after the project is accepted?
We want to see the resolution with the application. We always get questions on this about, you know, how should they be worded? What should they look like? It's basically a budget resolution
A budget resolution.
from
Gotcha.
from your city council, whatever your governmental structure is. And it basically says we commit to funding. I think the best wording is up to 20%. You put, I think Maggie's got some wording out there somewhere.
Mhm.
Was that in the FAQs maybe?
Yeah, we have a sample government resolution in the FAQs, and I did
Okay.
post it, and I'll try to post it to this question, the link, but we can also send it out to everyone as well.
Okay.
There will be a
Thank-
follow-up email, folks, for everybody who's registered for the call with a lot of this download.
Thank you.
Anonymous person asks, does the amount of funding that you request affect your score in any way? For example, do you score higher if you're requesting less than the 3 million cap, or is the fund request irrelevant to scoring?
Totally irrelevant.
Totally irrelevant. Perfect. Another anonymous question, if a city is proposing to construct a path across multiple municipalities, a roadway that spans 3 municipalities, what information is necessary from the other non-sponsor jurisdictions? Is a letter of support good enough? Or if the applicant plans to pay for the improvements themselves, is anything else required from those other municipalities?
We just want to know that you're working together. Of course, only one municipality can be a sponsor. So one of you are going to have to take on that responsibility. But we, of course, want to, you know, see letters of support, perhaps a government, a council resolution from that municipality saying we're in support of this project, anything like that. We need to know you're working together.
Great. Very helpful. Thank you, Carlos, for posting the answer to the sidewalk width versus a shared use path width. That is in the open questions and answers for the person who asked that question. Could you please go back to the last question and cover this question, which John's response was, no, that's illegal.
There is such a thing called stringing. And that's basically, if you get a contract, you cannot just keep adding on to that contract. So it's kind of like that. It's kind of like that. You know, if you got a $2 million award for a specific project during the last cycle, you've realized that, oh, this is probably going to cost 2.4 million. So now I'm going to jump into the next cycle and try to make up that difference. No, we won't do that.
Okay.
But John, it is okay if it's a different segment of the same project. So,
Yes.
okay.
Yes. And we're careful about that too. We're going to look at those very closely because I think it's going to come up quite a bit.
Kind of like
No
double
double
dipping for
dipping.
insurance.
Yeah.
My wife has a dental plan and I have a dental plan, and oh yeah, never mind.
Right.
So a couple more, I think we're gonna get there. So there was a question. Oh, if a county is providing engineering and construction labor, is that part of the match or is it counted in the local column of the budget form?
If a county is providing an engineer, that would be in the local only.
Okay,
That's something that you're contributing yourself to the project.
great. This is a question regarding uploading documents. Can you redact a summary or retract, segment out a portion of a planning document that's really big, that is relevant to the project at hand? So in other words, can I take the bike ped chapter out of my comprehensive plan out and upload that instead of the entire comp plan?
Sure. Just reference it where it came from. So we know it came from a plan.
Great. Will you score any higher if you submit or attach phase 2 engineering plans that are in progress?
No.
No.
We just want to know that that's where it's at. We
Okay.
just want to know that it's in progress. It's the honor system.
Great. If you were awarded phase 1 from Itep previously, can you apply for a new phase of the same project?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Anita. All right, team, am I missing anything big? I think we may have gotten to everything. But just that Complete Streets program question is still kind of lingering out. I'm not sure what that is.
Well, will applications for complete street programs be applicable? It could be the same project. But I'm not sure. You can't send us a complete streets application if you're, you know what we have to follow our application system. But a complete street project could also be eligible for an ITEP project.
Okay. I answered a question previously that it didn't appear here, but the community score is not integrated into the overall application score. They're separate things. The community score is used only to rank a community's level of, or the project's level of need in order to, you know, both meet the 25% set aside requirement and also determine local match. Is that correct?
That is correct.
There's a question here about multiple jurisdictions. Melody, did you ask that already?
Yeah,
If the
if
city's-
something crosses, yeah.
Okay.
We got that one. All right.
I have a
Go
quick
ahead.
question.
Go ahead.
Just for clarification, there was a previous question about the PRA. And so, Brian, would they find that PRA in the Gata portal? And how would they find that form? Because I think that was part of the question too. For this specific
I think there
grant.
might be some confusion about, because you mentioned in the Gata portal signing it. The Gata portal has the ICQ, which is a questionnaire for administrative questionnaire. It has some similar questions. However, the PRA is the programmatic ITEP program, programmatic risk assessment. And it's a PDF document that's you open up and you can fill out and complete. The link is in the ITEP website. You complete it and you sign it at the bottom of that PDF, and then you upload it as attachment. It's not related to.
It's not related to the Gata portal, even though it's part of that. Great, thank you.
Yes, it's
Thank you for
part
that
of
clarification.
Gata. Thanks.
Great. All right. I am going to say we are complete. If there are lingering questions, we will try and get IDOT's responses to those and include those in our wrap up and our Q&A. So once again, just to close out, our final webinar is on Wednesday, September 14th, same bat time, same bat channel, mostly a Q&A. There's the email address for the ITEP program people, and then our website or web page is there for your use later on. We will have the recording, we will have the slides, and we will have all the FAQ posted there. Thank you, everyone. This has been magnificent. We had over 300 people registered for this, so we consider that a big success, and look forward to seeing you in a few weeks.